And yeah, feel free to let me know if there's any additional support I can provide Jamie.
Alrighty, y'all. So, a little under the weather. If my voice fails, forgive me. We'll see how this goes. Uh, Last week, we dug into a little bit of coding a simple little output. Uh, Refresh and simple output of the current temperature in Atlanta using some JavaScript. Uh, we gave the AI a prompt asking it to use this API. An API means an application program interface. In most cases, when we're talking in web development, the API is going to be a web service that you can connect to with your program to get additional data. And specifically, when we get to the competition stage, um, every year the competition app specifically uses an API like this Open Media weather one, but not for weather. It has been, whoa, I'm trying to remember what it has been in the past. It's been a messaging format or platform like uh, Discord for just messages. It's been a help desk format. Uh, I'm totally blanking on what's the oh my. The online help forum for programming. I can't believe. And the funny thing is it used to be on the tip of every developer's tongue because when you ran into a problem working in web development and you're trying to figure out how to do something, the first place you'd go to Google and you'd Google it and it would be the first thing that comes up. Um,
To do.
oh, Overflow, Stack Overflow,
Oh, Stack Overflow, yes.
right? So Stack Overflow is this whole site for people to ask questions specifically about programming problems, and then other developers and other tech people would chime in and give their responses. And this was actually we built a whole clone of this for the competition just a couple of years ago. The funny thing is um, even if I copy the title of this problem directly and put it into Google now, the AI overview response is what pops up, and I think most people end up reading through and using to say that basically AI has taken over the job of Stack Overflow. Especially, I know in my company with all the developers I work with, almost nobody goes to Stack Overflow anymore because AI has replaced that functionality. And even with Stack Overflow, because it was real people answering, um, it was just as much as reliable and unreliable as AI. AI can be unreliable sometimes, but so can people. And even with Stack Overflow, sometimes you had to go through several posts and pages to try to find your solution. I'm looking for where someone else has said like, well, they'll link YouTube or sometimes they'll link other Stack Overflow posts to go to. And now with the AI responses just in Google alone, most of those problem solving tips are contained at least within the AI response. This question was basically trying to get Docker to start on Windows. It was bookmarked by me because I couldn't figure out how to get mine to start one day. Um, because I don't use Windows a whole lot. Anyways, so again, going back to the competition, always uses an API, and it's the same kind of API that the weather API uses, which is called REST. We'll get into that later, but we used this weather API to pull the current temperature for the Atlanta area, and display it on our index page. Again, uh, index meaning index.html in this case. Um, it could also be index.php because I wanted to point out that we're going to be using mostly PHP uh, and HTML because PHP generates HTML. Um, Might be a little confusing at this point, but the important thing here is the distinction of files named index. When you're dealing with a web app, either the index.php, it could be index.html. The files named index have a special place, and most web servers, which is what we're running to produce this output, see a file named index and assume that's what should be presented first. So we didn't actually have to type index, I can't type HTML. But if I do type it, we get the same result. So what's happening here is because it's that special name, index, the web server just goes ahead and serves it here. So the same thing can happen if the web or if the file name is index.php. Um, and as a demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and again, you should be in your workspaces and if you can kind of follow along. Oh, sorry. Step back just a second. In your workspaces today, they have been updated. So you don't actually have to, if you don't have access to your AI yet, and again, uh, make sure that you are signed up for GitHub and have applied for the GitHub education account. Anybody get their education account established yet? Stafford or Marley? Okay, so we still need to do that. Um, but within your workspaces here, if you open, oops, see chat.
If Stafford says not
Yeah, Stafford.
letting, what is it letting you? Like you're not able to log into GitHub or the coder? And I guess Marley's saying you do have your GitHub account.
And then last week,
Oh, the
um,
education part.
it's not letting you sign up for it.
You don't know your coder password.
Oh, let me get you that.
Is the education part, is it initially that you have to apply for it and then after that gets approved, you might be able to log in?
All right, Marley, just sent you the email address and password for your uh, coder. And the GitHub education is different from your coder login. Um, Also, last week it seemed like the GitHub or the what is it called? The Copilot chat, GitHub Copilot chat extension wasn't working. Um, I was able to go through and just confirm that um, it does work for this version of VS Code that we're using it. Um, so let me right. So for instance, and this is a prime case, I think we might have done this example last time. I'm going to switch to the ask mode. We have agent ask edits new, changes every week. Last week we had agent ask and plan. Ask mode is just simply to ask it for information. So I'm going to ask it to explain the fetch function. Um, and every time we start our workspaces up, which I started everybody's earlier this morning because of the update, it does double, it does a reinstall of the correct version of Copilot Chat. So, given that there might be an issue, and I hope this isn't true, but because we all connect through the Coder server, it might see everybody logging into Copilot chat through the same IP address somehow as a violation. Um, I'm hoping that was not the case. But here I asked it to explain the fetch function, and it shows me that fetch and then endpoint is what it is here. And the endpoint here was this URL for the OpenMedia API. It sends an HTTP request to the URL in endpoint. In this code, constant response equals await fetch endpoint. Uh, Fetch is a built-in browser API for making network requests. It returns a promise. Await pauses the asynchronous function until the request completes, and the result is a response object. So right here, there's some stuff that we might not understand already. It's kind of uh, assuming that we know what a promise is for one, and what a response object is. Um, so this might be where we then have to follow it up with a question about what a promise is, um, and what is the response object. But we'll read the rest of its response. The code uses that response to check for response OK is true for successful status codes like 200. What it means there is HTTP requests, even when you just make a request to get a web page, it'll return a status code, and we'll let the Google. There we go. So HTTP status codes come in 5 different classes, and it's a number. So when it's saying 1XX here, it could be 100. The most common is 200, means success. Everything was understood and accepted. And that usually also means it comes back with the response or the HTML that you wanted. 300, 301, 302 mean a redirection. It means it's been told that what you're looking for isn't at that location right now, but it's at a different one and it knows where to go. 400 are error responses. So 400 is a general error. 404 means it couldn't find anything at the URL you requested. 402 is unauthorized. Um, and then 500, which is almost always just 500 or 501 sometimes, means that a server error happened. So nothing you in your request was wrong, but the server couldn't respond and it produced an error. So with the response object, basically response.ok means anything that was 200. Um, if it failed, it throws an error, which is kind of a little bit weird because if it's not okay, it should already throw the error. Um, and so then we get the response back in a JSON form. So let's go back and ask it about that promise. So in JavaScript, a promise is a JavaScript object that represents a value that you'll get later, usually from asynchronous work like a network request. So we we touched this last week, but the difference between asynchronous and synchronous means that is basically asynchronous. Multiple things can happen at the same time or happen in conjunction. And so you can have a counter counting up from one or counting up from 0 to 100 while you're also making a web request to an API. Synchronous means that everything happens in order, waiting for each step to happen or each step to complete before moving to the next step. That's why we had to create an asynchronous function so that we could employ the await feature here, and we'll ask it about await after we finish with promise. But a promise is a value that you'll get later from asynchronous work, like a network request or fetch. Um, so here it's showing us that fetch produces a promise. They're calling it a response promise here. So the fetch does not return the weather data immediately. It returns a promise that will eventually resolve with a result or reject with an error. So um, promises either resolve or reject. So if everything goes well, it resolves, and this response promise gets filled in when the fetch is completed. So that can happen while other things are happening at the same time. Um, some states that come out are attached to promises because a promise, like everything in JavaScript, is just an object. It's just a bundle of variables. Um, Common states, so the promised state can be pending, fulfilled, or rejected. With await, so we didn't have to ask it separately. Await waits for the promise to finish and gives you the resolved value. So this kind of is uh, what am I trying? It kind of goes against the whole asynchronous thing because again, asynchronous means don't wait for each step to finish, but then you add await saying wait for the step to finish. Um, that is simply because in order to access the await, you have to put your function in asynchronous mode to even be able to call this. Um, and without await, see, you have to do all this extra code is really what the issue here is. You'd have to do fetch and then add your then when it gets a response, convert it to JSON, and then here then is a like a chaining function. It gets called so when fetch finishes and returns a its promise in like a synchronous mode, you're calling a function over that. And then when it finishes that function, you're calling another function. And if there's an error, you catch that. So what all await is really doing for us here is simplifying our coding. So that makes it worth first putting us into asynchronous mode and then calling await. Um, uh, so that explains why we kind of do the backwards thing of calling it into asynchronous mode but using await. Just makes the code shorter and cleaner. So now we have a little bit better understanding of the promise. Let's look at how it actually happens. We create our response. This is going to be the promise, and we wait for that promise to be completed or resolved from the fetch function. And then once it is, we can say, okay, does the response object, which was our promise, have an OK status? And if it doesn't, then we're going to throw an error and deal with that. But if it is, then we move on to the next step and we use the await one more time because this JSON function of the response object that we got from fetch converts the data that the fetch function got from the API into JSON, even though it was already JSON, which we showed by making our request manually. And I got to copy the latitude. And longitude. And because the API in this case is just a simple what's called GET request, this is part of the REST API concept. But in this case, we're able to make just simple requests to the API using our browser, and we get to see what the response is. Um, and so we can see this format, when it comes back looking like this, is what's called JSON. And I don't have it off the top of my head what it stands for.
JavaScript object notation.
Yep.
Sorry, that's just the
It's funny, those things that you use every day, they just become second nature. But JSON stands for, yeah, JavaScript Object Notation. What that means is it's a way of wrapping up a whole bunch of data into simple uh, and readable objects. So it always, well, it doesn't always. Most of the time, it will start with the opening and closing brackets. I can't even see the edge of my screen because Zoom has put a box over it. Let me do this so I can. There we go. All right. So in this case, JSON, again, object notation. So most JSON responses start with a curly brace. Curly braces indicate or are wrapped around um, objects. You can have arrays that start with square braces. I'm going to copy the JSON and this handy little site. Oh, I'm going to paste it into this. This is just an online JSON editor, but it makes it a little bit easier to see and read with the highlighting, and also how you can, again, curly braces kind of wrap objects into groups. So we have our main group with 9 properties. This current units group has 3 properties, and current group has 3 properties as well, because each of these current values respond or corresponds to a current unit. So that's how we get our 67.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, there we go. So, like I said, the curly braces indicate an object. Square braces are arrays. So I'm just going to add 3 values. There we go. So objects and arrays are pretty much what you should find. I can't think of any other property types off the top of my head, but most every JSON object you'll be working with, uh, pretty much anywhere, will be either curly braces or square brackets. Um, and it will describe basically some unit of information. In this case, this is weather for this longitude and latitude. We can see that it took 0.0205 milliseconds to generate it. UTC offset seconds. So we can read that to mean how many seconds from the UTC time is it offset, and since it response is in UTC, Universal Time Code, which is Greenwich Mean Time. I know it's super confusing that they have 3 different names basically for the same thing, but UTC stands for Universal Time Code. It is uh, centered over Greenwich, England, also sometimes called Greenwich Mean Time. So 0 seconds offset from that is the same as UTC. The time zone then is Greenwich Mean Time, and time zone abbreviation is also Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. That's some extraneous information. I don't think we needed most of that. Our elevation here in Atlanta is 327. I'm going to go ahead and guess that means meters, but it doesn't say, so we don't know. What's important is the current units and current values. So that's how we can double check our API here. When we go back to our code, we've taken that JSON and cast it into this constant called data. And then all we have to do is go back and link up the 2 parts that we need. We look for that current temperature, which is going to be in the current section with the key, and that's another important thing to know here, is objects usually take the form of key and value. Key and value. This is a key, and its value is another object of key and value. Whereas arrays are just value, value, value. So in our code again, we're looking for if everything is data, so this is data here. We're looking for current and temperature 2 meters. So go current and temperature 2 meters. That's at 67.6. And then we want to match it up to the unit. So again, we start at the root level. That's what we call data. We cast it into the data value variable. We go to current units and temperature 2 meters, current units, temperature meters, and it's degrees Fahrenheit. And in this case, we did something a little bit special just in case. If that wasn't found, then we said, go ahead and assume we're in degrees Fahrenheit. And if everything worked, then we wrote that out into the temperature element, which we extracted from the HTML up here using this get element by ID, which you can see pretty simply. Anywhere there's an ID, you can use document get element by ID in that ID, and it'll select this element. So all that does then, right down here, we take that temperature element that we selected using get element by ID, and we write to it text content because it's just got text in it. We basically are just overwriting it here. So the whole process happens in a flash. You saw it there, reload, and we got our 67.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, so because we didn't get a chance to really field questions about this last time. Um, Anybody have questions about the uh, load Atlanta temperature function here? Oh shoot, I was trying to get to it earlier and then got distracted. In your workspaces now, because you don't have this already, you can open your terminal, type scale, and then use tab complete, but it's scale underscore lesson. It'll say this will reset the lesson setup and do any work in the project directory. Um, if you've already copied this or whatever, you might not want to do that. But if you just want what I have here currently, if you do yes, it'll rewrite it. For instance, I go ahead and I think it said like JavaScript goes here. Yeah, I can run that again. And it's going to populate that. It's also going to fix the indexed HTML file. Um, I'm sorry, I meant to tell you all about that little trick earlier so that you could actually follow it in your workspace. All right. So let me know if you updated your lesson with the scale lesson function. Nobody yet?
I'm running it now in my instructor workspace, and but I might still have issues with connecting to Copilot.
Shouldn't need Copilot for that one. So that one's
Okay,
just a
sure.
bash function.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah, I have intro to AI. So I have that pulled down. Those yeah, the scale lesson command is pretty easy. I can drop it in the chat. Mm.
for the student workspaces, you won't have to enter anything. Yeah. Uh, Instructors have to pick which lesson to import. Oh yeah, thanks for putting that in chat. So there's two, well, there's more than two, but two really important things to to learn in this. Um, the first one is this idea of it's called manipulating the DOM. DOM is the document object model. With an HTML document like this, the DOM is the uh, arrangement of all of the elements within it, from the HTML element and the head all the way down to this paragraph element with the ID temperature. Web apps generally uh, present information using one of two techniques. The first one is just by producing HTML that's written in, or just by producing HTML uh, so that it's presentable from a web server. Uh, Now that can happen either just by writing HTML, or as we'll find out, PHP is intended to write HTML as well. So PHP is kind of like superpowered HTML because it can use val or variables to change the HTML that it produces. The other method then is what we've done just here is this DOM, document object model manipulation. And we did that by selecting an element in the DOM. In this case, it's the paragraph with the ID temperature, using our get element by ID, and then writing something into its text content. Now, text content is pretty specific in this case because it only has um, text in there, and we're only replacing it with text. That's why that's appropriate. But we could do inner HTML if we wanted to include some additional HTML. Let's see. I'm gonna do there we go, span. We're gonna add a class. That suggestion was nice. So make some room here. Oops. All right. So I added a bold around Atlanta, Georgia, and temperature value. Now we're gonna refresh this so we can see there's the bold, but this we added that class around this, or span with a class around the temperature. It doesn't do anything yet because we need to update our style. So let's go ahead and add that class. Temperature you. And now we can apply a couple of things to it. Two is going to be really big. Um, if you're not already familiar, there are multiple ways to style or specify color in styles. We could use numeric values. The short version is a numeric, or I'm sorry, hex values is what this is called. Um, or, um, and it's called hex because they are in hexadecimal values, and they're actually what's called hex duplets. So two hex values for a total for three different colors, red, blue, and green, for a total of six. The short version is just to include one. So 333333 is the same as 333. Let's do 00, and this is where hex comes into play. Hex is 0 through 9 plus A through F. So we'll do FF and 33. And it doesn't have to be matched. You can actually do, well, let me do match for this. So that produced a really kind of ugly green color. Boo. But this could be represented in short version just by saying OF3, and it's the same color. I really don't like that color. Let's go to this. And this will produce another way of indicating colors. Instead of having to figure out what the hexadecimal value for each color is, and this is uh, I think this is more commonly used now because it's more specific. It also allows you to add this RGBA value where you are basically doing red, green, and blue because all colors in on screens on monitors can be represented through red, blue, and green. So in this case, and these are values up to 255. So from 0 to 255. Um, why? Well, the reasons are based on computers and math, but I would have liked to have seen them just do 0 to 100, right? If this represents 100%, it just would have made sense to at some point incorporate that. Um, but also now we can add an A value, which is the oh my gosh, what am I looking for? Opacity. It's A for alpha channel, which is an old school designer's term in colors, but it means the opacity. So in this case, we took our initial kind of reddish orange color and we reduced its opacity down to, let's make it 75%. And opacity is from 0 to 1. So here they did kind of do 0 to 100%, except for it's in terms of 0 to 1. So 0.75 means 0.75 opacity. So what would happen if the background, and actually let's do that. I'm going to make this a simpler color for one. I'm just going to go straight red. And I'm going to reduce this to 0.5 for 50%. I'm going to give the background or the body, and going back to our HTML document, the body tag is everything that you see on screen here. So if we add a style to it with a background color, we're going to use the same RGB specification here, so it kind of looks a little cleaner. So now we made it blue, and our temperature value is 50% red. This should work. Great color choices, Jamie. A little bit hard to see. Maybe if let's bold that to where's that? Here. Actually, we've already got it's wrapped in a stylable element. So font weight is bold or bolder. You can also use numbers to specify it, but I'm just gonna make it nice bold here. There we go. So you can see how it's purple now because it's 50% opacity means some of the blue background blends with it to make it purple. If I bump opacity up to 100, you can see how the red really comes through now. So um, when you're uh, styling things, there are multiple different ways to do color. The main uses will be through the uh, hex value, which again we can do shorthand OOF, that'll be our blue, through RGB or RGBA functions with 0 to 255 for color, red, blue, and green, and 0 to 1 for the opacity. Man, don't ask me where these standards came from because they don't make a whole lot of sense to me. But that's what we have to work with. That's a really harsh color too. Okay. So again, here we switched from text content to inner HTML because we wanted to add the HTML styling. Um, again, DOM manipulation and what I was trying to, there's, and for those of you who haven't done a lot of HTML yet, this should is a pretty good read. Um, oh, but that's not the one. Gosh, there it is. This is the one I meant to paste. Kind of shows the relationship between everything. So we have our document and our root element is HTML. We have that head element, right? Because all HTML documents should have a head and a body. So we have that over here. Here they're using the example of a link. So the element H, or I'm sorry, A has an attribute H ref. That's how we link things. And element H1, which is a title, like a title or a header, has text. And so, yeah, it's called a DOM tree if you want to read it that way, like a tree all the way through. And if I indented things properly, it helps a little sometimes to see the indentation because now you can kind of follow the same pattern that they've done here. Oops, down through the branches. So HTML is the trunk, head is a branch, body is a branch. Then the H1 and P and this other P are all branches. Even the script element is a branch in the document object model. So like I said, there are two different ways to change what is presented in your web app, and one is through manipulating the DOM with JavaScript. So I'm not gonna show, I'm not gonna do it for you here, but try altering the app.js to select a different element. Let's go use the H1. Now, there's two different ways to select that one. You can add an ID attribute to it, or well, let's do it with the ID. The other way might be a little bit more complicated. ID equals, oops. Okay. So if you add the ID welcome there, you should be able to create a new constant value here to select that by ID, and then just go ahead and um, alter its content. So, for instance, maybe make it say, uh, add your name to it. Welcome your name. So I just took mine off screen. So I'm going to work on it at the same time. And then in your workspaces, you should be doing that.
Hey, Jamie, for opening the HTML page to like view it rendered, how do you open that?
So if you come back here to your workspaces
Mhm.
and click on the workspace and then
Ah, project output.
do this one, it'll open up in just a standalone. And then
Mhm.
sometimes you got to do show as tab
Cool.
and move it.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, because this URL is super long and nobody's going to remember how to type that one.
Yep. Yep.
see. Say, Cody, I don't see a workspace for you. Have you signed into Coder yet?
Not yet.
Again, if you go to the class site, our URL to log in, and then you just need your email address and password, and then you can sign in. Okay, so I did mine. Let me get back to here. So when I open mine again, you can see refresh. I changed my welcome, and it happens so fast that you don't even get to see it change like this because this one has to go out and fetch that weather variable. But we can see here that I've changed the welcome, the H1 welcome, and then we can take a look at how I've done it. And it didn't require any functions at all, really, or I didn't have to write a function to do it because I'm simply doing it in, again, the step-by-step JavaScript code. So I left this in place, but I created a new constant variable named my name and just added my name to that. Then I did the same thing. I created a welcome element constant and used the document get element by ID and selected the welcome ID element so that we're selecting this. And then all I had to do was say change the inner HTML of this welcome element to welcome to my weather app, comma, bold, and then that variable my name. And again, like we've done here with the URL, we're using the JavaScript variable replacement syntax, which is this backtick. Could also have done it by saying, and almost as if it was listening to what I was saying, uh, I could have done it this way too, and the result is the same. So that's the simplest form of DOM manipulation, simply changing the content of an element using JavaScript. Hmm. Okay, was anybody else able to alter their DOM? I'm not sure I understand, Shanika.
It's okay. I don't want to complicate. We can talk about it later. Uh, I guess see if anyone has questions. Yeah, was everyone able to open up the coder workspace in VS Code?
Shanika, are you saying you opened it in your desktop VS Code?
Yeah, I did both.
Yeah,
I
because
was, I guess, more seeing if they opened like code server and if they've tried updating the CSS like you were doing earlier. Or if anyone's having trouble logging in again.
okay.
Sorry, I dropped some extra stuff in the chat on accident. So
Yeah, Steph, I just sent you your login details. And then once logged into Coder, you can also change your password if you want something more memorable, or just use your browser's password manager to save it. I was gonna add the next step to the weather update, and I don't see. Yeah. So our URL here returns our current uh, temperature um, in this form using degrees Fahrenheit, updated every 900 seconds. What is that? That's like 15 minutes. That makes sense. Because 500, no, 300 seconds is 5 minutes. That's it. So every 15 minutes it's updated, um, which is why this is out of date, maybe. Yep. So updated 71.3 now. Um, and the next step was to add a weather icon, but um, it doesn't appear that it's giving us that weather icon that's supposed to be there. Let's see if the AI can sort that out for us. So I'm going to start a new conversation, a new chat, and I'm going to make sure it's in agent mode. And I'm got my app.js page open. So I'm going to ask it, so, and it's hard to get used to even now. Uh, AIs don't have feelings. They don't get hurt if you aren't polite. And in fact, it's a good idea to drop any sort of niceties like please and thank you and can you please. Instead, just tell it what you want. AIs work by processing and producing what are called tokens. Um, in the case of a prompt to the AI, for add a weather icon for the current conditions from the Open Media API. Um, each word in that sentence is considered a token, and every word in line and word and code that it produces is also a token. And the way AIs are currently being built and charged for, it's processing by token is what you're paying for essentially. So that's why having the GitHub education account is super important because we don't want to pay for anything. So this could even be shortened further. I maybe don't have to specify from the Open Media API. That's part of getting to know how to use AI to write code, is understanding when something might be important to include. In this case, that might be an extra detail. I'm going to run it without it. So add a weather icon for the current conditions. Let's see what it comes up with. All right, so it's going to inspect it and see that I'm already using the Open Media API. So my original prompt by specifying the API is unnecessary. Let's confirm that should slot in neatly, it says. And remember how I just said it basically uh, they are charging by the tokens that are processed. So when you see all of this output that seems a little bit maybe superfluous. Oh, it just moved, so where'd it go? Refreshing too fast. There's the app is already pulling live weather data, blah blah blah. Um, some people suggest that that is actually just them trying to add more tokens to the bill. Um, and again, the way Copilot chat works, it's a kind of a general fee, not per individual token use. But there are horror stories of developers at companies using uh, what's called a quota. They're paying per token, and they had like a maybe a quota of 200 tokens or something like that, and the system didn't even the AI didn't get finished processing their prompt before it ran out of tokens. Um, so uh, again, the Copilot chat is a pretty good deal, especially if you get the education plan when it's free. Um, so it produced code. Let's take a look at what it did. And the way it works with our Copilot chat plugin and our code server here is that we get to see in green is what it's adding, and red it's what it's removing, all the changes that it wants to make here. And the really cool part about this is that until you hit keep or undo, which undo will erase all of it and keep will undo the highlighting but leave all the code it's written, you can actually still run this with the changes. So we can see what the changes are or how the output changes and whether that's a correct. We can see that the output directly uh, still got our red color and our bold Atlanta, Georgia, but it's added an icon. So let's take a look at how it did that. Um, First thing, we have this new function, get weather display, and it's using something called a weather code. And then it tests if the weather code is exactly 0, and that apparently means sunny and clear sky. Weather code 1 means mostly clear. 2 is partly cloudy. 3 overcast. You can kind of see how the pattern goes. What's interesting is when you get to some of these other ones, 45 and 48 mean it's foggy. So instead of saying, and this could be worded differently, you could say, um, if, oops, started in the wrong place. If weather, there, and again, knew what I wanted to do. You could write it like that. So what you're saying here, if weather code is exactly 45, or, and these double pipes, as they're called, is shorthand for saying or. It actually is a binary comparison operator, but we just like to call it or. Oop, didn't mean to move that. So if it's 45 or it's 48, it's foggy. And you can see how the AI wrote it by putting it into an array, and if the array includes the weather code, is what this is saying. So it was really shorthand for saying something like foggy codes is an array of 45 and 48. And if foggy codes includes the current weather code, then it's foggy. Yep, clean that up. Okay. So that was one way to write this. But you can see it's just so much easier to say all in one line, create your array. So 51, 53, 55, 56, and 57. I don't know why, but they all mean drizzle. All these codes mean rainy, probably different types of rain or increments of rain, heavy rain, light rain, whatever. Snow, thunderstorms, and oh, and then this last one is kind of a fall through option. Fall through means if none of these other options matched, then we're just going to show a temperature or a thermometer and just a label of current weather. It's so that we can, so that no matter what, we return some sort of weather icon. We can see here that the endpoint, that URL that it was using, it changed it because it shows that it's removing one and adding a different one. We can see by the highlight what exactly has changed. And all it did here was add that weather code. Now that's what I was missing here. So if I come back up here, current, we want the temperature 2M, and we can see there it is. There's our weather code in the current section. So again, red means something that was removed. Green means something that was added. And here it's specifically showing us, I hope you can see the slight color highlighting, but just the comma weather code was what was added there. Scroll down and we do the same process because we're looking in the data, current, and looking for weather code. So we get our current weather code, and then the weather display takes that weather code and passes it through our new function, matching for the weather code. And then obviously, again, it's removed the original update line, the inner HTML update, and written a new one, changing current conditions, and then adding our icon. And it was pretty clever here for it to use. And I'm going to go ahead and accept it by clicking keep now. What it did here was rather than having to go and find an image for the various different weather icons, it understood that it could use text emojis that are currently part of the character set that HTML can understand. So you can write HTML code with your weather in here. In fact, let me just index HTML. Trying to find a place to put it. Here, we'll put it at the end of that line. So you can just use emojis, copy and paste straight in line, and they work. So all the AI did was knowing that, it just used emojis instead of going out and trying to find uh, icons or images that it would have to replace in, which would be much more complicated. So it really took the most simple approach to adding that icon. And of course, since we looked at it earlier, we know that it's not going to update until every 15 minutes. The last update was at 15:15, that's UTC time. So that would have been 11:15 our local time. Um, so we wouldn't expect to see any change for the next 4 minutes. And even then, I highly doubt the weather icon would change in that time too. So in Atlanta, it is partly cloudy. Anybody have questions about what the AI did there? Do you understand the new get weather display function? So I know Anthony is from the Chicago, or no, he's from uh, Normal, Illinois, right?
He's in Illinois.
Yeah, I think it's Normal. Is it? Yeah, Normal, Illinois. So our little weather app example here might not be very helpful to him, even though he had a track meet today. So let's go ahead and do something a little bit more complicated. Now you could just add a new prompt to each or to the existing session. I like to start new sessions when I'm going to start something new, like a new feature, which this might qualify for. So I'm going to ask it to we'll keep Atlanta. We'll add normal, I guess I should say Atlanta, oops, Georgia, normal, Illinois, and uh, Los Angeles. Okay, so we're going to add a drop down containing the following cities: Atlanta, Georgia, Normal, Illinois, and Los Angeles, California. And when a city in the drop down is selected, update the weather display for that city. That's all we have to tell it, and I bet it nails it first time out. We'll see. The other thing I want you to take note of as we do this is how we started with a simple HTML page with no real interaction on it, and we're progressing each step. We're adding new and more complicated features. In web development, this is a process called iterative design, where we iterate through different phases to get to the final version that we want. Now, at this point, we don't even know what the final version that we want looks like, but we're just adding features and building features out into a more complicated little mini app here as we go along. Okay. Still finishing it. Does validate everything that it's writing. Update complete. So I'm first just going to take a look at the changes briefly. Change the output. Change the error message. And it changed how it initializes. See, that we called the load Atlanta temperature function initially, but since that's changed, it uh, it calls load city temperature using the value from the select. This section right here, this is how it knows when you change which city is selected. We'll go back up to the top. Yep. Let's just load it and see how that runs. So it's pre-selected Atlanta. If I check or I select normal Illinois, that's pretty chilly. Anthony's running in track meet in 48 degrees today.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Let's check out Los Angeles.
That's kind of chilly too.
I don't know.
So,
I kind of like that. 64 degrees, especially in a city like Los Angeles. Los
it's good
Angeles,
when the
and
sun is out, but once the sun goes down, that's kind of cold.
my perfect outdoor temperature is about 54 to 52 degrees.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, so we can see that event listener that I looked at just a moment ago in action here. You don't have to click anything except for just change your selection, and then it refetches the temperature. So, and this is something that's super important and will get used a lot. The results look good, so I'm gonna go ahead and accept, but take a look at how it does this. So first of all, remember our DOM selectors? We create a new constant, that's city select element. We do the same thing, get element by ID, select or city select. We can see where I added it, and it added that ID. There it is. The values are just straightforward Atlanta, normal, and Los Angeles, which that's interesting. I didn't see that in the code before. There it is. It created this constant called cities, which is an object, curly braces. The object has three keys, Atlanta, Georgia, normal, Illinois, and Los Angeles, California. Those are what correspond to these selections. And then it added a new object for each key with latitude and longitude keys representing the latitude and longitude of those three cities. So now if we look at, again, that selector, we call something new, add event listener, and change, and then this function thing. How does this work? So again, with the AI, I'm going to go ahead and do a new one, and I'm going to switch to ask mode. I'm just going to ask, how does the selected code work? I don't even have to specify it. So the selected code listens for changes to the city dropdown. Remember that was the dropdown that is added. The city select element add event listener change attaches a handler to the select element. When the user picks a different city, the change event fires. Event target value gets the newly selected city name, and load city temperature is called with that city name, which triggers the weather fetch and UI update. So add event listener literally means that it's listening for an event. It's just when you call this, it's going to add that in the background. So it'll continue listening as long as the page exists. So that's why I don't have to do anything else. It's listening for me to change this. And every time I select something different, that's considered a change event. And so there we're listening for the change. And then it does this thing. This is, and it's not explaining this, which is kind of surprising, but this right here is what's called an anonymous function. So the response to a change event or any event is going to be a function. When that event happens, you're saying, listen for this event, and when you see this event happen, call this function. Um, and that's just how the event listeners are written and have to be written. Excuse me. Um, because you can see even inside this anonymous function, all it then does is call our function with the well, that's interesting. Oh, I don't know. That's because that's not the declaration of the function. We have to go to the declaration of the function, right? It calls this function with the city name. And it gets that city name because this anonymous function, again, this is how the add event listener is built. It always passes an event. And from that event, we can use target value. And that event is going to be, or the event target is always going to be the thing that changed, the thing that caused the event to happen. In this case, it's the select. So then we want the value of the select after it changed. And that will be one of the cities. So it's just going to pass that back up through our load city temperature. It's going to get the uh, information about the city from the city's object that it just added. And it's going to use those to fill out the latitude. See, city latitude, city longitude. All that comes together to make pretty spiffy little weather forecast thing. And you could continue that. You could flesh that out to add as many different cities as you wanted. One of the tricks here that the AI has done for us is we didn't have to go anywhere to look up the longitude and latitude of Normal or Los Angeles or even Atlanta in the first place because the AI did that. Um, I would guess that the AI probably already had that somewhere in its training. So AIs are models that have been trained on data, and it probably already had that. Because if the AI, especially Copilot Chat, if it has to go out and search the internet for something, it usually will tell you that it needs permission to do that. So it looked these up. Pretty interesting that even normal Illinois, it knew what the longitude and latitude was for. Alrighty. So my voice is about shot. Anybody have questions? Anything you want to see in particular? Okay, so once again, we don't have a session next week. For the session following, let me pull the info up. For April 18th, I will update the workspaces so that the additional code to our little weather applet here um, will be available through the scale lesson function. Um, and I would encourage you to, and actually I'll add that before Monday. So I would encourage you in the next 2 weeks to start your workspace up, run the scale lesson function, and inspect the code, play with the code, because now that we've touched briefly on the uh, DOM manipulation through JavaScript, we're going to look at the other method that we'll be using to change the output of our web apps, and that will be through PHP scripting. Um, JavaScript DOM manipulation happens in the browser. So your browser is loading this HTML page and the JavaScript, and then in real time here in the browser doing all the functionality. All the changes are happening in your browser. When we talk about doing it with PHP, we'll use PHP to write changes to the HTML before it even arrives at the browser. Um, which may seem kind of like a roundabout way to do things, but PHP is so much more powerful than your browser's JavaScript. And it gives us a lot of tools that we don't have in JavaScript yet. And so we'll lean really heavily in our competition app on that PHP power and then use a little bit of the JavaScript DOM manipulation for various things to supplement that. So that's what we're going to be doing when we come back on the 18th. As ever, if you are in your workspace in between now and the next session and have an issue, you can always come to the contact page and just fill out the form, and that'll email the instructors, and we can get back to you from there. Alrighty, if y'all don't have anything else,
Cool. Yeah, I don't have anything else. William, anything from you?
Oh, talking about nope. You guys have a
Nope.
great Easter weekend. Hug your family members, and yeah, we'll see you guys a week after next.
All right, yeah. Thanks for everything, Jamie, and hope you feel better soon.